like, this is crazy. The sanctuary is occupied.
Mhm. Stephanie, are you there? Oh, there you are.
Hi, yes, I was, oh. Steve, what's the best way for me to talk without feedback? Oh, you want to turn off your speaker for now? I'm sitting next to Steven.
Hi, Stephen.
Oh, wait, I can't hear you. Oh, I probably should hear her from yours.
This is other stuff I didn't. So switch your thing down, your volume thing on the bottom right.
Mhm.
You're gonna have to select your system thing instead of bird dog, but we're gonna have to switch that back.
Okay. Okay. That's okay. I'll switch it back. All right. Marcia, can you say something now?
Yes.
Okay, now I hear you.
So, you know, the one thing I don't really know
Uh-huh.
is how do you use the host key and how do I get control of people to mute them?
Yeah, so, okay, so a couple things. I'm going to, actually, who the heck is the host? I don't think
For somehow we're recording all of this right now, just so
it
you all
is
know.
recording. Yeah, that's okay, because it starts in 10 minutes. So, so open up your participant window on the bottom.
Yeah,
You see participants, open up that. Just click on it.
yeah.
Okay, and then under the three names, you see invite, mute me. Oh, mute me. I'm gonna claim the host. Oh, what's the host key? Do you have it?
Yes.
Okay,
The host key is 181571.
awesome. Okay, so now I'm the host, but I can make you the host,
Or you can make me the co-host.
or I can at least make you a co-host.
Yeah.
So here's what I'm thinking, but you let me know. I'm gonna make you a co-host. Okay, so I can't and don't want to do any speaking during this. This is your gig, and plus it'll throw off the sound here. What I am happy to help you with is during the questions, when you say, you know, Missy Sossman has a question, I'm happy to like spotlight her. And what I thought I would do during questions, first of all, I have this in the comment box that I'll keep. Copy it. I'm going to keep pasting it, right? Because people won't see it as they enter. Because I want everybody to be in speaker view. And then when Matt is speaking, I'll spotlight him. And then when someone asks a question, like Missy Sossman, for example, then I'll spotlight him and Missy until he's done answering the question. And then if Rabbi asks a question, I'll take Missy out and put in Rabbi. So I'll let you lead, like, okay, Matt, you know, Rabbi Beich has a question for you to announce on Zoom. I'm not going to say anything. I'll just be your spot. Oh, I forgot my mask. I don't even know why I took it off. I'll just be your spotlighter if that works for you.
That would be lovely. I would,
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. So, yeah, no problem. So
I'm happy to give orders to people and call on people. That would be fine.
yeah. Okay. So, great. Otherwise, yeah, I think we're good. So I'm going to switch so I won't be able to hear you anymore. I'm going to switch, and Steven's going to do a sound check to make sure you on Zoom can hear him. Okay.
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 Thank
Hold
you.
on. Okay. It's on Bird Dog.
Check. Marcia, can you hear me?
I can
Hopefully
hear
you can.
very well.
So she's mouthing, but I don't hear her.
Okay.
Yes.
Switch back to your thing. So we can
Okay.
I can hear Stephen really well.
Okay. We're trying to figure out why we can't hear you. Okay. All right. Hold on. Let's do that again.
Can you hear me? 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 Can you hear me?
Oh, too many times. So hold on. I muted it just now,
Muted what? Oh, this-
just now, just to stop that.
Yeah, okay.
Put it up front.
Tell me when to unmute.
Go ahead. Check, 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 check. Okay, why is that happening?
So. Oh,
Was mine on?
oh, wait, is it my mic?
Oh, that's what it is.
It's my mic.
Okay, let's try it
Okay, super.
I turned off the lights because it's worse. Okay.
Oh, wait, hold on. Wasn't just me.
Are the speakers on the television on?
So you guys can sit anywhere. The screen is for the speaker to be able to see everyone. Yeah, yeah,
Can we pretty much sit anywhere?
anywhere you want.
Crazy. 25% of the population is crazy.
Check, 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 1, 2, check, 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 1, 2, check, 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 1, 2. I mean, that's fine. Can you unmute number 4? Okay, can you unmute number 4? Or is it? Oh, it's already unmuted. Okay, check, 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 1, 2. Okay, I think we're good. No more feedback. Good.
Hello, everybody.
Hi, Dan.
Hi, Marcia. Hi, Ellen.
Hi, Dan.
Hi, Art. Stephanie, do you got all the extra microphones off? Great.
We seem
Well,
to be down
good,
to
Dan.
one voice at a time, which is a good thing.
One at a time, right? I remembered what Matt Rothschild had done before this group was he was the leader of the progressive magazine or newsprint.
Right.
Is that still operational?
I believe it is.
We have children the same age and our kids played soccer together.
Hello, everybody.
Hi, Amy.
Hello, Amy Fields. Thank you all for your patience as we're waiting for people to join both online and in the synagogue.
Oh, that's a clever way to do it, Marcia.
It was something the sisterhood decided they wanted to do.
Hi, Sue. Hi, Sue. Hi, Sue. Hi, Sue. Hi, Sue. Hi, Sue.
Uh-oh. We're back echoing.
At least Sue knows we're glad to see her.
Yeah.
Was it me?
It was about 10 of you, Dan.
Right, I'm trying to repeat this circumstance. Testing, testing.
No, now it's fine. It was doing that before, but then
Right.
fortunately it stopped.
Nice to see everybody this morning.
Good
It's
morning.
nice to see you.
Same here.
Afternoon.
Last I heard, we had about 40 people signed up on Zoom and about 10 in the sanctuary. Did you get any updates since then?
I have not, Dan. Last I heard was about 55 people total. So that is similar to what you had. Just really great. It's our best turnout ever.
Right.
Zoom ever, right? We used to fill the.
Right. Zoom
we
ever.
could- We could fill the entire, with the right program, we could fill the entire social hall.
You're right. Zoom ever.
Would you please turn up the heat? I will.
Do we have to wear a mask if we're at home?
No, not
Not if you're
officially.
vaccinated.
Okay.
That's right.
Dan.
Uh-oh. Alan, will you say testing and see if it bounces?
Testing, 1, 2, 3, testing, 1, 2, 3, testing, 1, 2, 3, testing, 1, 2, 3.
Testing 1, 2, 3.
Oh, interesting.
As we're waiting for our speaker to be introduced, it would be helpful for those of you who are participating via Zoom, if you have questions, to write them in the chat, and Stephanie and I will do our best to get them all asked of Matt. We certainly will open it up for questions, but since I'm hearing some problems with this echo and back noise, it might be helpful for people to mute their microphone and write their questions in the chat. Thank you.
Testing, 1, 2, 3, testing. No echo. Testing, 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 testing. So what'd you do before? Because it wasn't echoing. Right now, it's not echoing. Does that mean these guys can't hear us?
I think muting might have made the difference.
Well, we don't want to hear them until they ask questions. I mean, push comes to shove. they could put their questions in the chat window and I can read them. Testing. Okay.
Sorry that went to everyone, but Dan, I just put a message in for you.
If you're on Zoom and you hear this, give me a thumbs up, please. Okay, they can hear us, Stephen. We should get started. Okay, thank you for waiting.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Mark Kirstian, president of the Temple Bethel Men's Club, and on behalf of myself and Marcia Mansfield, who is the president of the Sisterhood, we're very delighted to welcome you to this program this afternoon. Before I get started and introduce our speaker today, I'd like another Marcia to come up here, who's going to tell you about a program of the Social Action Committee that is relevant to what we're talking about today.
So I'm Marcia Vandercook. I'm the co-chair of the Social Action Committee. And among the things that we work on are voter registration, voter engagement, and fighting against voter suppression. Next week in the social hall, we will have another program where we will be addressing postcards that will go out to voters who were taken off the voter registry for failure to vote 4 years ago. And it's a project that we're working on in conjunction with the League of Women Voters. It's something that you can work on here if you would like to come and join us, or it's something that you can work on at home. So if you're interested, please go to the Temple website. You can find the program under our calendar, look for Postcard Party, and sign up to join us either on Zoom in the social hall, or just you can do it at home on your own time. If you have any questions, you can let me know. Thank you.
Thanks, Marcia. Thanks. So it's my pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker today. Our keynote speaker is the executive director of the Wisconsin Democracy Campaign, a wonderful organization. Since coming to the Democracy Campaign in 2015, he's concentrated his work on raising public awareness of the need to ban gerrymandering, to limit big and dark money in our politics, to protect and expand the freedom to vote, and to oppose the anti-democracy movement in our state, in our country. This is probably one of the most relevant type of topics we could have in terms of what's going on in our country right now. He's the author of 12 Ways to Save Democracy in Wisconsin, and published by the University of Wisconsin Press this year, 2021. Prior to joining the Democracy Campaign at the start of 2015, Matt worked at the Progressive magazine, a wonderful magazine. I actually went to one of their conferences here in Madison. He worked there for 32 years. For most of them, he was the editor and publisher of the Progressive. While there, he wrote another book entitled You Have No Rights, Stories of America in an Age of Repression. He edited an anthology called Democracy in Print, The Best of the Progressive, believe it or not, from 1909 to 2009. His pieces have run in the Chicago Tribune, the LA Times, the Miami Herald, and a host of other newspapers. He's appeared on Nightline, NPR, C-SPAN, WISC TV, where he does election night commentary. I guess we can look forward to that in 2022, next year. You probably also heard him on The Devil's Advocate, WOJB, WORT, or some public radio. His first job out of college was working for Ralph Nader at a publication called Multinational Monitor. It's my pleasure to introduce to you, and I'm so happy he's able to speak with us today. And by the way, we will have time for questions afterwards, so you can write down your questions. Those of you that are on Zoom, you can write them in the chat, and we will record them. And those of you that are here in person, we would ask you to come up to the mic when you have questions after he speaks, so that the people on Zoom can hear. So again, it's my pleasure to introduce Matt Rothschild, the Executive Director of the Wisconsin Democracy Campaign.
Thank you, Mark, for that nice introduction. It's nice to be back at Temple Bethel. I want to thank the Men's Club and the Sisterhood for inviting me. I always like coming back to Bethel. I love your rabbi. I love Rabbi Bonnie. I love the work that you all are doing here. I had my two sons bar mitzvah here and my daughter Catherine bas mitzvah here. So it's kind of like coming home. So I appreciate the opportunity to be with you. I'm going to talk about the gerrymandering issue. I'm also going to talk about where we are as a country in this rather delicate moment, because there is an explicit and militant anti-democracy movement in this country. And then I'm going to just read about 3 minutes from this book as to why I'm still hopeful, regardless of what's going on. But I want to talk about gerrymandering because it is a very timely and important subject. Banning gerrymandering is one of the 12 ways to save democracy in Wisconsin, in my book, in any event. The word gerrymandering, interesting enough, is an American word, pure and simple. It was invented in the United States about 200 years ago in Massachusetts, when there was a governor there named Governor Gerry, or Jerry, and he was in power when the census figures came down on the even decade years. It's U.S. Constitution says every state has got to redistrict, reapportion when the new census numbers come in on those even decade years. And his party was in power, so he had the ability to redraw a district. And he redrew a district that was so funny looking, people thought it looked like a salamander. So then people put the name Jerry and salamander together to get gerrymander. And that's a name that has took now for more than 200 years. And gerrymandering is wrong whether Democrats are doing it in Illinois or whether Republicans are doing it in Wisconsin. No party should be able to keep themselves in power just by moving a line here or there on a map. What typically happens, or what happened in 2011 here in Wisconsin, was one of the most grotesque gerrymanders in modern American history. The tactics were to cram as many Democrats into as few districts as possible, leaving the remaining districts predominantly Republican, or in cities like Sheboygan or Marshfield or Beloit, to splinter Democrats from the cities into rural areas. A quarter of the city will go into the southwest of Sheboygan and be swallowed up in the Republican rural areas there, and then their voices would get diluted. They wouldn't be represented by a Democrat. They'd be represented by a Republican who doesn't share their views. So this is a way to get unrepresentative government. It's also a way to get hyper-partisan politics, because when elected officials are in safe seats, and most of the seats are safe because of gerrymandering, there's no reason for compromise. Your seat isn't vulnerable. The only person that you really need to please is your party official, the leader of your party, Robin Voss, if you're in the assembly, for instance. So it's very tricky for you to try to break ranks, even on a issue of some moral importance to you where you disagree with your party, because if you do so, Robin Voss, or for that matter, the Democratic Party counterpart, Gordon Hintz, is going to say, well, if you want to go astray on this issue, be my guest, but I'm going to primary you. I'm going to support someone in the primaries who's going to do exactly what I want. I've got a ton of money here to support him with, or her with. So you can be a hero, but you're going to be out of a job. So take your pick. And that's a language that politicians understand. Most politicians, with the notable exception of Lynn Cheney and Adam Kinzinger, want to keep their jobs and barely will do anything that threatens their jobs. So that's the problem with gerrymandering. And in 2011, the Republicans did an incredible job of gerrymandering. You got to hand it to them. First of all, I've got to turn the clock back a couple of years to 2009, when the Democrats, hard as it may be to believe right now, held not only the governorship with Jim Doyle, but actually were in control of the state assembly and the state senate. And there was a bill that the Democrats introduced. Spencer Black was one of the big proponents of this bill. I think he was the author, or certainly the co-sponsor. Representative Spencer Black from this area introduced a bill to ban gerrymandering in Wisconsin, and it actually had a hearing in the state assembly when Assembly Committee Chair Jeff Smith, who's now Senator Jeff Smith from the Eau Claire area, held a hearing on this issue. But the Democratic leadership wouldn't bring it to the floor for a vote. Why didn't they bring it to the floor for a vote? Because political power is the most addictive drug on the market. And Democrats were drunk with their power, thought they were going to keep their power in 2010, and then they'd be able to rig the maps for themselves. Well, lo and behold, we know right now how short-sighted that was, because Scott Walker came to power and the Republicans swept the Democrats out of the state assembly and swept the Democrats out of the state Senate. And so Republicans wasted no time in 2011 to rig the maps for themselves. They actually flew in a political scientist from Oklahoma, of all places, to draw the maps with some fancy software. They didn't just draw one map, they drew 9 different incarnations of maps, each one showing successively a greater share of the seats in the assembly going to Republicans, keeping all votes equal. They weren't changing a single voter's mind. They were just shoving more and more Democrats into fewer and fewer districts, or splintering more and more Democrats. And the Republicans took one of the most extreme of those 9 maps and then rammed it through. And then it was a great success for what they wanted to do. This guy in Oklahoma knew what he was talking about, knew how his software was working, because even in elections where Democrats would win a majority of the votes in aggregate in the state, no matter what, Republicans would still hold 60% of the seats in the assembly and about 60% of the seats in the Senate. So that's some good gerrymandering if you can get away with it. And they got away with it. They almost didn't. There was a lawsuit brought by Democratic plaintiffs called the Whitford case. The Whitford case in federal court here, the plaintiffs won. The Democratic plaintiffs won in 2015. 3-judge panel, federal judges, said that the hyperpartisan gerrymandering of the Republicans was unconstitutional, that it violated their First Amendment rights to freedom of speech because it diluted their speech, and freedom of association, and their 14th Amendment right to equal protection. That went to, and actually that panel of federal judges ordered the maps in early 2016 to be redrawn. It said these maps were so rigged and so unconstitutional that no citizen in Wisconsin should have to endure another election under these unconstitutional maps. That was January 2016. Well, the Republicans appealed that order. They won at the US Supreme Court a stay on that order. So we didn't have new maps in 2016. They didn't redraw the maps then. We had the same old maps. And then it got to the US Supreme Court to hear the essence of the case. The US Supreme Court kicked it back to the federal court on a technicality that I don't need to go into. And before it could get reheard at the federal level, the US Supreme Court took 2 other cases from other states on redistricting. One was from Maryland, where the Democrats had grotesquely rigged the maps in their own favor. The other was from North Carolina, where the Republicans had rigged the maps grotesquely in their own favor. So this was a perfect opportunity for the US Supreme Court to say, we got to ban hyperpartisan gerrymandering. It's bad when any party does it. And actually, Chief Justice Roberts in the Rucho decision, Rucho versus Common Cause, acknowledged that hyperpartisan gerrymandering is incompatible with our democratic principles. That was the quote, incompatible with our democratic principles. But yet, in the next breath, and this is not a direct quote, he said, go away, don't ever come back. I don't want you going anywhere near a federal courthouse door again with your cases about hyperpartisan gerrymandering, because they're unjusticiable, which is fancy legal jargon for we don't want anything to do with it. We don't think we can measure it, so we don't want the judges at the federal level involved with it. So he threw it back to the states. Well, that's a catch-22 for states like Wisconsin, where the party that has rigged the maps is still in power because they rigged the maps. How are you supposed to fix it in a state like that? It's a big problem. And that's the problem that we've been working on at the Wisconsin Democracy Campaign and other great nonprofits like Common Cause and the League of Women Voters and the Fair Elections Project and Citizen Action. We've all been working on this problem. And a great thing has happened over the last 5 years. There's been this great grassroots movement in Wisconsin to ban gerrymandering. You see in this map below that in 56 counties, Wisconsin has 72 counties. In 56 of our 72 counties, the people have voted by overwhelming margins, either at county board meetings through a county board resolution or in countywide referendums, that they want to ban gerrymandering, that they want independent, nonpartisan redistricting like they have in Iowa. The Iowa model's been in place for about 40 years. In Iowa, it's not the elected officials in power in the party that controls power in those even decade years that draws the maps. It's career civil servants that are sworn to be nonpartisan. They draw the maps, like at the Legislative Reference Bureau. And they draw the maps with specific criteria that bans them from using data that would tilt the maps in favor of one party or another. It's worked great in Iowa. It could work great here in Wisconsin, and the people of Wisconsin want it. But what the people of Wisconsin want, the people of Wisconsin don't get way too often in Wisconsin right now. Part of the problem is gerrymandering itself. Part of the problem is money in politics. But look, 72% of Wisconsinites in one poll from Marquette Law School poll said that they wanted to ban gerrymandering. That included 63% of Republicans and 76% of independents. This issue, it crosses party and ideological lines. I mean, look again at that map, 56 purple counties. We don't have 56 red counties and we don't have 56 blue counties in Wisconsin. They're not 56 Democratic counties. They're not 36. They're not 26 Democratic counties in Wisconsin, but in 56 counties, people overwhelmingly have let the legislature know that we want independent, nonpartisan redistricting. Well, fast forward to this year. And what did Robin Voss and Devin Lemahieu do? Well, they came up with another rigged map. I was there when Robin Voss was testifying, and I heard him say on the stand that he actually used partisanship when he was drawing the map. I mean, that was a killer confession. He said that he drew a map to help Republicans stay in power, essentially. When he said he uses partisanship, that meant he looked at the map with a partisan lens to see how they could increase their share or cement their share of power by moving lines here or there on the map. That's exactly what the people don't want to have happen in Wisconsin. And so they had a day-long hearing. The only people who testified in favor of the Republican maps that were rigged along the 2011 lines were Robin Voss himself and Devin Lemahieu, the Senate Majority Leader. Everybody else, and there were more than 200 people who signed up or who were in line to get into that hearing room, and there was an overflow too. Everybody else testified against. That didn't make any difference whatsoever, because within 2 weeks they ran through the rigged maps. Fortunately, unlike in 2011, there was a governor of a different party, Tony Evers, was able to veto these maps. And so they went to the courts. And there's always a race to see what court you can get into when there's this conflict over the legislature and the governor as to what the map should look like. And so the Wisconsin Supreme Court took original jurisdiction of the case. It said to the Republicans that the conservatives on the Supreme Court, state Supreme Court, agreed that they don't have to go through the lower courts and have fact finding at the court level and decisions at the lower court level. They were going to take original jurisdiction at the Wisconsin Supreme Court. And then within the last 10 days, the Wisconsin Supreme Court came down with a ruling as to how the case was going to go. And the ruling was, how are they going to proceed? What factors are they going to consider in deciding the map? Because it's the Wisconsin Supreme Court that's going to decide the map, at least initially. And they said they're going to do basically what the Republicans did. They're not going to accept the Republican maps because they were vetoed, but they're going to use the same prevailing theory that the Republicans did, which was to keep those 2011 maps in place to the fullest extent possible. It was a least change approach from the Wisconsin Supreme Court. That was their words. Those words aren't in statute. They're not in the state constitution. They're not traditional redistricting practices. Quite the contrary. In Iowa, for instance, they don't try to keep incumbents in place, which is what least change does. But anyway, that's what the plaintiffs and all parties to this case have to do now. They have to come up with a map that looks like the 2011 map largely, but has some differences because of population changes. That's the only thing that they said they should consider, is population changes since 2011. And so they're taking new maps up. I've got a little schedule here up to December 15th, that's just in a couple days, all parties are going to submit new maps. January 4th, there are going to be final briefs to the Wisconsin Supreme Court. There may be a hearing on January 18th. There is some hope that however these maps are drawn or picked by the Wisconsin Supreme Court, that a federal court will come in afterwards and change the maps to the better. We have good lawyers working on the pro-democracy side on this issue, especially with Law Forward, who I imagine are going to jump into court and try to make some claims. Despite what Chief Justice Roberts said, you can still go into court, into federal court, especially on voting rights, on the Voting Rights Act, and say that the representation of African Americans and Latinos in the Milwaukee area is not proper according to the Voting Rights Act. And then a federal court will modify the map that comes out of the Wisconsin Supreme Court. But we're not going to get a brand new, much, much better map than we had in 2011. So what we're looking at right now is enduring for another 10 years or more a map that has violated the constitutional rights of Wisconsinites, which is just outrageous when you think about it. So I'd encourage you to read the decision in the Whitford case by the 3-judge panel. I also would encourage you to read the very profound dissent at the Wisconsin Supreme Court by Justice Dallett, just written a couple days ago about why they are using the wrong standard and why this is an assault on representative government in Wisconsin, which is what she said it was. And indeed it is. Now we are going to continue to fight to ban gerrymandering in Wisconsin after this round. There is a piece of legislation in the legislature that was introduced by now Senator Jeff Smith and Representative Deb Andraka from the Milwaukee area that would ban gerrymandering in Wisconsin. Just like the old Spencer Black legislation would. It ironically has 3 Republican co-sponsors, Travis Tranel, Todd Novak, and Joel Kitchens. Last time around, it actually had 5 co-sponsors. I'm given to understand that Robin Voss did not want 5 co-sponsors, so maybe that's why 2 of them dropped off. And even worse, the 3 co-sponsors, and especially Todd Novak, who really does believe in independent nonpartisan redistricting, doesn't believe in it enough to break ranks with Robin Voss when it came to approving the rigged maps that came down the pike in the legislature. So all 3 who even co-sponsored the legislation turned around and voted for the rigged map. So that was unfortunate. It wasn't a profile in courage. But we're going to keep fighting. I want to turn that whole map purple. Instead of 56 counties, I want to get all 72 counties on board. Columbia County's been tricky. I don't know exactly why that is, but it's not far away. It should be an easy pickup for us. And there are other counties where there are great activists working on this issue. And we're going to keep pushing legislation. There's also the possibility that there will be a change in the composition of the Wisconsin Supreme Court. Right now, it's just 4-3 because of Jill Karofsky's victory. And Brian Hagedorn is an X factor up there, even though he is extremely conservative on social issues, has issued some surprisingly good rulings where he departed from his 3 other Republican colleagues, especially on the vote last November. That was the crucial thing. And he didn't sign the entire decision that the majority ruled on this gerrymandering case. He had a consenting opinion where he said you should consider other things than just population shifts. Maybe you should consider communities of interest, which is a traditional redistricting criterion. So we'll just have to see what happens in the next month here coming out of the Wisconsin Supreme Court, but we're going to keep pushing for this bill. We're going to keep pushing at the grassroots. If there's a change in the composition of the Wisconsin Supreme Court, maybe the case can go back there. And so maybe we won't have to wait till 2030 or 2028 to change this. Certainly, we're going to need a change in the composition of the legislature if we're going to ever get better, more pro-democracy bills through. But that's kind of gerrymandering 101 for you. I also want to talk about where we're at as a country and as a state, because I've got to tell you, I'm extremely worried about democracy. I'm worried about democracy in Wisconsin because we have denialism here in Wisconsin about Joe Biden being the legitimate president. Janelle Brandtjen, who is chair of the Assembly Committee on Elections, sent out a letter to her constituents saying that actually Donald Trump had won the election, and she chairs the Campaign and Elections Committee in the Assembly. We have we've got Hagedorn. No, we have Gableman, who is working for Voss as a special counsel to look into the investigations for the umpteenth time. It's a fishing expedition. He's incredibly biased. He said after the elections that the elections were stolen by unelected bureaucrats in Wisconsin. And so how can he do any kind of an impartial investigation of the elections when he said without any factual basis that it was stolen by bureaucrats? He's hired other people on staff who also are biased. Andrew Closter was a lawyer in the Trump administration. Andrew Closter said the election was flat out stolen also. Andrew Closter wrote online in April that the right wing should have its own hooligans, irate hooligans, like the Proud Boys, and that they should have captured DAs, corrupt DAs, to let the irate hooligans off the hook. Those are his exact quotes. Here's a guy who's investigating in Wisconsin, who is making calls for right-wing vigilantism and celebrating crooked law enforcement. I mean, it's just appalling and outrageous that that's what's going on here. There's also been a raft of anti-democracy bills introduced in the last year. Fortunately, Governor Evers was there to veto them. One of the bills in its original form would have said to any employee of a nursing home, you are committing a felony if you even encourage any resident of the nursing home to vote. Not who to vote for, just to register to vote, or, hey, it's election day coming up, do you want to vote? That would be a felony. That's how outrageous it's gotten in this state. Unfortunately, the governor vetoed that. Then there was a bill that was introduced to say no town, village, city can have more than one drop box for absentee ballots. Now, Madison had something like 15. Milwaukee had something like 18 or 19 drop boxes last time around. If you're going to limit Milwaukee or Madison to one drop box for absentee ballots the day before election, you can imagine the long lines of cars at that drop box. It's going to be like 10:30 at night on April 15th when people are trying to get their taxes in. And so many people will be in line that some are going to get discouraged because they can't wait in line 3 hours to put their ballot in the drop box. And so they'll turn around because they have to put the kids to sleep, or they have to go to their second job, or they have to get rest for their job in the morning. And so they will be discouraged and suppressed from voting. Again, this was vetoed by Governor Evers, and it was good that it was. Even more worrisome, right now, there's a campaign in Wisconsin to subvert, first to slander, then to subvert the Wisconsin Elections Commission. There's an all-out assault on the reputations of the commissioners, including 2 of the 3 Republican commissioners. There is an all-out assault on the reputation of Megan Wolf, the tremendous public servant who serves as the administrator of the Wisconsin Elections Commission. And the end in view of this campaign is to take the administration and, even more importantly, the certification of elections out of the hands of this body, the Wisconsin Elections Commission, and hand it over to the legislature, which will be dominated by Republicans because of gerrymandering, or into the hands of some other partisan Republican official. If Governor Evers loses, I guarantee you that's what's going to happen. And then, no matter what the actual vote count was in Wisconsin, the legislature or that Republican partisan official will be able by fiat to tell you who won the election. That is about as anti-democracy as you can get. But that's where we're at right now. There's also a constitutional amendment being proposed by Republicans that would do the same thing, that would take the administration and certification of elections away from the Wisconsin Elections Commission and give it to the legislature. It's ironic because the Wisconsin Elections Commission was created by Republicans in 2015 when they took an axe to the Government Accountability Board, because the Government Accountability Board, which had a tremendous national reputation for being impartial, had the audacity to investigate Scott Walker in the John Doe 2 investigation, because Scott Walker, there was evidence anyway that Scott Walker was violating the statute against coordinating with outside groups when you're a candidate. He was going around asking big donors all over the country to give checks to Wisconsin Club for Growth, and then he'd tell Wisconsin Club for Growth what to do with that money. Wisconsin Supreme Court gave him a get out of jail free card when they invented a novel interpretation of the First Amendment that said it's a violation of the First Amendment for the state of Wisconsin to ban coordination between elected officials and nonprofit issue advocacy groups, which the U.S. Supreme Court has never said, but that's a tangent. This effort to delegitimize the last election, delegitimize the Wisconsin Elections Commission, hand over election administration and certification to partisan Republican officials. We'll turn Wisconsin into Georgia. We will not, and we won't have fair elections here. That's the game. And let me put this in national context, because it's not only happening in Georgia and Wisconsin, it's happening in states all across the country. There's a front page article in the New York Times today about this. We are seeing an unprecedented assault on our democracy nationwide. There is this militant anti-democracy movement, the likes of which we haven't seen in the United States since 20,000 Nazis gathered in Madison Square Garden in 1939 under huge swastika flags. That's how bad it is right now. And we need to be very mindful, of just how dangerous this situation is, how close we are to a kind of a fascist takeover of our country. I thought on the evening of January 6th, maybe the Trump fever would break. And maybe it broke for what? 24 hours, 36 hours, 48 hours max. And now it's come raging back. It's come raging back because the liar, the big liar himself keeps repeating it every time he opens his mouth. And it keeps coming back because the base, the rabid right-wing base is feeding off of this. And because otherwise decent Republican officials aren't courageous enough to stand up to their base. And when they do so or minimize or try to even move away from some of this conspiracy mongering, they get in trouble. Look at Robin Vos. Robin Vos isn't an idiot. Robin Vos is a smart man. And Robin Vos isn't the most right-wing person up there in the Capitol. He is Speaker of the Assembly. He's let a lot of these things happen. He put Janelle Brandon as head of the Wisconsin Assembly Committee. So I'm not trying to do him a favor here. But look, he said when Janelle Brandon wanted to go to Arizona to see what the crazy people were doing down there with the recount, he made fun of him a little bit, and then he got in a lot of trouble from his base. And so there was a couple protests at the Capitol, right-wing protests this fall, chanting Robin Vos has got to go. And I'm sure he wasn't comfortable hearing that. And so what did he do? He hired Gableman. He got on a plane and sat next to Trump and gave a toothy smile and told all Republicans in Wisconsin, including at the base, that he's on board with all this nonsense. Bigger picture still. What constitutes this threat to our democracy? It's a toxic combination of white nationalism, the Trump cult itself, irrationalism. Look at the irrationalism, not just about the election, but the irrationalism about COVID, the irrationalism that is the very essence of QAnon. We can't have a functioning democracy with that kind of level of irrationalism. And then the fourth element of this anti-democracy movement is this right-wing media ecosystem that feeds everybody in the movement on a 24/7 basis, as if on an IV drip of this right-wing propaganda. I was driving around to give a talk in La Crosse the other day. And so when I drive around Wisconsin, I'm flipping the dial to see what's on and to see what's on right-wing radio sometimes. The amazing thing to me about the right-wing radio I've been listening to on the last two trips I took was, one, the demonization of liberals, the mockery and demonization and hatred toward liberals. And also three things. The shorthand about Black Lives Matter, the racism that is out there. They just use the initials BLM to get the patella reflex of the racists out there going. If they just say BLM, people who are listening to their station get it. It's about blacks. They hate it. They're against it. And they're angry. And the third thing is just this crazy COVID denialism. Yes, on Thursday, when I went out to La Crosse, right-wing radio is telling people not to take the booster shot or not to get the vaccine after we have 800,000 dead Americans. I mean, this is just lethal craziness, lethal craziness. And so we need to do everything in our power to resist this anti-democracy movement. And we need to register to vote. We need to get all our friends to register to vote. We need to turn out and vote. We also need to talk to 2 or 3 people, each one of us, needs to talk to 2 or 3 people in our extended social circle who don't agree with us. And sometimes in Madison, it's hard. I mean, I used to live 1 block from West High School and I could go a week without bumping into someone who viewed the world differently than I did politically. But if you have people in your social circle who didn't vote the way you wanted them to vote, or flirting with these cults, or are engaging in, liberal trashing or any of these other anti-democracy manifestations, but are otherwise kind of decent people, you know them, you like them, you have a relationship with them, build on that relationship with them. Listen to them at the outset. Try to connect with them on some other than politics basis, whether it's sports or whether it's kids or whether it's the book club or the exercise group or the card game, the tennis game or whatever it is. And just try gradually to bring these people back from the craziness and the abyss. If we all can just bring a couple people back each, we may have a chance. We need to get a little bit lucky because I'm worried about the forces that are arrayed against us. But that's where we're at right now. I know it's been bleak. I want to give a little reading as to why I'm hopeful. This is from the conclusion of my book. It's just 3 minutes, so bear with me if you would. I recognize that democracy has been taking a beating lately here in Wisconsin and nationally, but I don't lose heart and I don't give up. Here are a few reasons I remain hopeful. People in Wisconsin believe in fairness. They want a level playing field. That shouldn't be too much to ask. I'm also hopeful because of the Black Lives Matter movement and the tremendous amount of activism it has sparked all across our state. To see nonviolent protests in dozens of our communities in 2020, some that had never seen an anti-racist rally before, was a balm to my spirit. I'm also hopeful because over the past 6 years, I've seen the progressive nonprofit sector in Wisconsin unify itself and work harmoniously toward our shared goals. We've torn down our silos, we've shelled our egos, at least for the most part, and we got a lot of young and impressive leaders taking on more and more responsibility. They will lead us forward. I'm also hopeful because of the strong advocates in our legislature for pro-democracy reforms. I'm hopeful because of the inspiring pro-democracy leaders we have on the national scene, such as Stacey Abrams or AOC or Bernie Sanders or Elizabeth Warren. And I also take hope from the mass movement to combat the climate crisis and the activism of young people in driving this movement. But frankly, part of being hopeful is a state of mind. Here's the great Irish poet, Seamus Heaney. Once in a lifetime, the longed for tidal wave of justice rises up, and hope and history rhyme. So hope for a great sea change on the far side of revenge. Believe that the further shore is reachable from here. And I do believe it's reachable. I also like this quote from Ta-Nehisi Coates. History is not solely in our hands, and still you are called to struggle, not because it assures you of victory, but because it assures you of an honorable and a sane life. I just love that. An honorable and a sane life. None of us is assured of victory, of course, but I know one thing for certain. Great democracy reforms won't happen without citizen activism and without mass movements. That's the lesson I learned from Ralph Nader, for whom I worked after I graduated college. And that's the lesson I learned from the people's historian, Howard Zinn, who wrote for me at the Progressive over the last 12 years of his life. On my wall at the Wisconsin Democracy Campaign is this brief quote from Zinn. Here's what he said. To be hopeful in bad times is not just foolishly romantic. It's based on the fact that human history is a history not only of cruelty, but also of compassion, sacrifice, courage, and kindness. If we remember those times and places, and there are so many, where people have behaved magnificently, this gives us the energy to act, he said, and at least the possibility of sending this spinning top of a world in a different direction. I love that image. And if we do act, he said, in however small a way, we don't have to wait for some grand utopian future, because to live now as we think human beings should live, in defiance of all that is bad around us, is itself a marvelous victory. So let's defy all that is bad around us, and let's celebrate all that's good around us, and let's save our democracy. Thanks very much.
Really powerful. Thank you, Matt. I'd like to take questions. I'm going to use my prerogative to ask a few, and then how are we going to do it with the virtual questions? You'll do it. Okay. So I'm going to ask a couple, and then we do have plenty of time. So then I'm going to alternate between the questions virtual, where we have something like 45 people, and then the people here, so we can kind of go back and forth. I have two questions I did want to ask you, Matt. In terms of the nitty gritty of what's going to happen next in Wisconsin, I understand that Governor Evers is going to be submitting new maps because the people's maps didn't even get all the Democratic support, which is a whole nother issue. So once he does that, how is this going to play out in terms of the maps? And the other thing I want to ask, which is a totally different question, many of us are deeply worried about what could happen in the future election, where the votes could go one way, and then theoretically, if it's left to a Republican legislature in the state under pressure from Trump, they could actually reverse that. Do you feel that our institutions in this country, state Supreme Courts or US Supreme Courts, could actually step up to the speed and stop that? In other words, if there was truly, let's say in Wisconsin, where Biden won by 21,000, and if we had a Republican legislature that said, no, we're going to send Trump's electors instead, obviously there'd be a lawsuit. Do you have any faith that our institutions would be strong enough to block a blatant disregard for results, which has never happened in our country before?
Well, I don't have a tremendous amount of faith because we won at the Wisconsin Supreme Court only by one vote last time. 3 of the conservative justices on the Wisconsin Supreme Court were perfectly willing to consider throwing out into the garbage tens of thousands of legally cast ballots, or ballots cast by citizens who were following the instructions of their elected officials. If it weren't for Brian Hagedorn, we may have had that huge trash pile. So it doesn't fill me with a lot of hope. There are some good things that are going on in civil society with coalitions of faith-based leaders that I know Rabbi Bonnie's been working with, and also coalitions of business executives that the Wisconsin Conservation Voters and other groups in Wisconsin are trying to rally leading CEOs in Wisconsin to step up and speak out against these anti-democracy efforts. And also, we're going to need nonviolent protests in the streets as well. We're going to need to use every peaceful means that we can to try to demonstrate to the folks who want to destroy our democracy that we're not going to stand for it. But I don't have a tremendous amount of faith in the US Supreme Court at the moment. How could you after this week's hearing on abortion rights?
Okay. So I'm gonna
on the maps thing. I didn't answer your maps question.
Right,
I'm sorry. So the parties to the case, and I think there are 9 of them, some on the Democratic side and progressive side, some on the Republican side, and including the legislature. Everyone's going to come up with a different version of a map on December 15th in 3 or 4 days, submitted to the Wisconsin Supreme Court, and they're likely to choose one of those maps. And all the maps have to be based on the 2011 maps. There'll be different versions of them, and they're going to choose one of them. They have another option. They could hire a special expert to draw one from scratch, but I think they'll just probably pick one of the ones submitted by one of the Republican groups.
And you mentioned about the civil rights issue in terms of communities of color. What are the chances that could change anything in terms of there's a lawsuit in federal court challenging that part?
It would make it better in the Milwaukee area.
Okay.
If the Republican maps do not adequately represent African Americans and Latinos, but it's not going to be making it better on a grand scale.
Okay.
So it's likely that the Republicans are going to have a lock on 60% of the seats in the Assembly and 60% of the seats on the Senate. But that raises another question. So how do you do politics then? Because one thing about gerrymandering is it assumes that we're not changing people's minds or changing people's votes. We need to change people's minds. We need to change people's minds in those counties where none of the resolutions or referendums have passed. We need to change counties in these areas that are pretty conservative. We need to find a way to start convincing a majority of Wisconsinites, or a large majority of Wisconsinites, even in rural areas that are Republican or reactionary or anti-democracy right now, that's not the way to go. That our vision of what a fairer, better, more just, freer United States is the way to go. And it's hard with the right-wing media universe that's out there, of course, but that's why I think it's so important to do the person-to-person work.
Thank you. So I think what we're going to do is I'm going to start with the virtual people, and I'm going to have Steph. No? Okay. So I'm going to invite anybody here to come up to the mic to ask questions. Anybody have questions? Anybody on the virtual audience have questions? Or any comments there that they'd like Matt to respond to?
I mean, I do have one additional comment.
Okay.
And that is, I am impatient with the U.S. Attorney General, Merrick Garland, in not indicting Donald Trump. I think he has a moral obligation. I think he has a historical obligation to indict Donald Trump for subversion, for insurrection or conspiracy to commit insurrection, and at the very least for election tampering. I mean, when the President of the United States tells the Secretary of State of Georgia, I need 11,780 votes. What is that but absolute clear-cut case of election tampering? And why are we not keeping this man accountable? I thought no person's above the law, including ex-presidents. And I know the idea is, well, it'd be bad for our democracy if, one president loses office and the next party comes to power and they prosecute the last president, and that could go on forever. This isn't like, we ran a stoplight or something. This is a huge crime against democracy. And for that to go unprosecuted would be just a scandal.
All right. Okay, go ahead, Stephanie.
So Niles let us know that if you're interested in a more in-depth treatment of the subject, Wisconsin Public Radio has an outstanding podcast called Mapped Out, which is well worth your time.
That's on the gerrymandering issue. I do want to recommend a book, How Democracies Die. How Democracies Die by two Harvard professors. It was written in 2016, right after Trump came to power. It's more true than ever, more scary than ever.
So while we're waiting for other questions, I want to ask another question. What are the chances that I know there's on the national level, one of the Democrats' bill, I think this is one that Joe Manchin signed on, would do something about gerrymandering. What does that bill do in relation to gerrymandering? And what are the chances of that?
Yeah, it's the Freedom to Vote Act. It would ban gerrymandering. I mean, there's very little time left for President Biden to get done what needs to get done, because it looks like the Democrats are going to lose the House of Representatives, maybe the Senate. So there's 10 months left. And the Freedom to Vote Act would ban gerrymandering. And it has some other great things in it too, and would ban some of this voter suppression that we're seeing in Wisconsin, and would ban the voter sabotage that's on the agenda here in Wisconsin and in other states. So the Freedom to Vote Act is a crucial bill that we need to get passed. So you definitely should be contacting your legislators. I don't know that it's worth your time contacting Senator Johnson, but you might want to give it a try.
Stephanie.
So I have a comment from Barb Woodruff. One of the things we'll keep doing in Greene County is voting rights marches, where we're having citizens sign our petitions supporting the two main national voting rights bills, and then forwarding copies of those petitions to our state senators, Joe Manchin and Kirsten Sinema, etc. And then a question, the U.S. Justice Department sued Texas over its map. Do you foresee that happening in Wisconsin?
I don't know if it's going to happen here in Wisconsin. It depends on how sloppy the Wisconsin Supreme Court is, or how sloppy the map is that they accept and push forward. But I definitely approve of and admire all the activism that's going on in Greene County on voting rights, for sure.
Matt, can you explain what happened with the controversy with the people's maps and why so many Democratic legislators of color voted against it?
Well, I'll try. I mean, the People's Maps Commission was a model of transparency. It held hearings in all congressional districts here. It took testimony from citizens across Wisconsin and from experts for months and months. It invited and took citizen maps, and more than 800 people produced maps, largely thanks to some great organizing by the Fair Elections Project and some other great groups. And then it came up with a few draft maps. And the first couple maps, it hadn't taken into the Voting Rights Act criteria well enough. And then it got criticized for that. So it hired a specialist on the Voting Rights Act and came up with a final map that at least the expert told them did accommodate the necessary guidelines from the Voting Rights Act. Still, some members of the Democratic Caucus of Color did not think it was giving adequate representation to African Americans and Latinos and voted against it. And, you know, I understand that. I saw Senator Lena Taylor testify at that hearing where Voss was testifying, and she was very forceful in her argument. So, you know, I'm not an expert. I'm not the expert on the Voting Rights Act, so I can't really referee that one, but I understand their concerns and I respect what they did.
Okay, thank you. Stephanie.
So Cindy said, has an article that points out historical facts. The article is called Studying Other Democracies in Crisis Allows Us to Better Understand the Challenges Facing Our Own. She writes that she's concerned it may be a glimpse at our not so distant future. So please educate yourselves, be aware, speak up, and vote wisely whenever elections occur. Get all your like-minded friends and relatives to go out and vote wisely. And the link is, the link is in the chat, which this is recorded, so you can watch after and we can post the links.
Thank you. So I'll ask another question. As you know, and people here know, I'm a lobbyist for the social work organization. I've been there for 29 years. And what I've seen from Republican moderates in so many cases, whether it's issues of guns or issues affecting LGBT community, Child Victims Act and other things, is that they will talk to me privately about their supportive. And some of them actually will start out being a sponsor of the bill, but when things get tough, when the NRA goes after them or Wisconsin Family Action or Catholic Conference, and I have stories about all of these, they bail. And other things, when there was a bill on conversion therapy that we're working on, and we talked to, we had a coalition, talked to quite a few Republican moderates who were supportive, and I refer those to Todd Novak, who is working on the Republican side to support these. And they would tell him, Todd, if it gets to the vote, we'll be with you, but we're not going to sign on. And so then the bill never comes up. So what can be done to given our current situation, to deal with the influence of money and also these special interest groups that basically prevent social justice issues that actually many Republicans do support, but they're scared out of their wits to do anything, and they won't stick their neck out, and they bail on things when things get tough for them.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. First, I just want to address something that your comment sparked in my mind, and that is, I hope we shouldn't speak in categorical terms about all Republicans. All Republicans are this, or all Republicans are that. When I'm listening to progressive radio and I hear it, it really bothers me because it's just not true. I mean, first of all, from a factual, logical argument, all you need to find is one Republican in the whole universe who isn't like that, and you've just committed a lie or certainly said an untrue statement. But secondly, it's just horrible politics. I mean, we want to convince some of those people who are viewing the world differently than we are, if they're in this kind of cult-like or anti-democracy movement, and some Republicans can be brought around on this. For instance, on the denialism of what happened in the Biden election, the denialism that Biden is a legitimate president. So you can look at this statistic two ways. 60% of Republicans think it was stolen from Trump. Holy cow, that's a lot, right? But 40% of Republicans don't. And so, you know, there's some people in that 40% camp who maybe you can have a conversation with about how crazy your party's gotten, or how immoral your leadership has gotten, or really, do we really want to go down this route of discrediting every election that we ever have, and can engage in that conversation. On the money and politics question, this is what we do day in and day out at the Wisconsin Democracy Campaign. We track and expose the money in politics. There are some huge players, money players in the Capitol, most prominently Wisconsin Manufacturers and Commerce, which has spent $27 million over the last 12 years to get a legislature that will carry water for it. And that's what Scott Walker was. I mean, he was a glorified water boy for Wisconsin Manufacturers and Commerce, or for Americans for Prosperity, which is the Koch brothers group, which has spent about $15 million to get a legislature that they want, or for the American Federation for Children, which is Betsy DeVos's group, that isn't about children at all, but it's about destroying public education, and wants to privatize our schools. And so those are three of the big players, and they have an enormous amount of influence. One of the problems with our democracy in Wisconsin is that too many of our elected officials consider their donors their constituents and not their actual citizens, or they consider their elected leader the only person they need to respond to and not their citizens. So the money in politics is a huge problem. It's a huge problem because of the Citizens United decision in 2010 that said corporations and other groups and super wealthy people can spend unlimited amounts of money to elect this candidate or trash that candidate. Citizens United overturning Citizens United is a shorthand for overturning more than a century of bad US Supreme Court decisions that say corporations are persons and money is speech, two falsehoods. And so we've got to amend the Constitution ultimately to get rid of that problem. But here in Wisconsin in 2015, our campaign finance statute, which is ironically called Chapter 11, and it is a bankrupt statute right now because it was rewritten wholesale in 2015 by the Republicans to give much more power to the super wealthy and to corporations. For the first time in 100 years, after that bill was signed into law by Walker, corporations can now give to political parties and to legislative campaign committees that the legislative leaders control. And there used to be an expression in Wisconsin, if you know some super rich people who like to play in the arena of politics, they used to like this expression. This expression is antique now. The expression is, I've maxed out. And what that expression meant before 2015 was that this super rich person had already spent the limit on politics in Wisconsin. Before 2015, that limit was $10,000. So if you were a Democrat donor and you gave $10,000 to Jim Doyle's governor's campaign, you couldn't give a penny to the Wisconsin Democratic Party or to your state assembly person or to your state senate. And similarly on the Republican side. But in 2015, they rewrote that and said that individuals now can give unlimited amounts to political parties. And so you have Diane Hendricks at ABC Supply, you have the E-Lines who live in Lake Forest and have business in southern Wisconsin giving tons of money to the Republican Party. You had the Democratic governor of Illinois, Pritzker, from the super rich Pritzker family in Chicago, giving $2.2 million to the Democratic Party of Wisconsin. I mean, this is just a ridiculous amount of money that super rich people are throwing around in our state. You don't even have to live in our state. The Cubs owner that lives in Omaha, Nebraska, sent $1 million to the Republican Party of Wisconsin. So our elections are too often the playthings of the super rich. And it's become increasingly a tug of war between a handful of super rich folks on the left and a tug of war between them and a handful of super rich folks on the right. And in a real democracy, we'd all have an equal tug on the rope. And I think everybody here and everybody on the Zoom understands that the average citizen does not have an equal tug on the rope. And we got to get to a situation where we have that. My vision of a democracy is a democracy where everyone has an equal say in the affairs of our government. And we don't have anywhere near that right now, largely because of this problem of money in politics.
So another thing that I've observed, and you see it in the polling, that while most Wisconsinites, support gun violence prevention bills. Well, most of them support Medicaid financing, except the Medicaid money. Most of them support marijuana, even legalization, and many other issues. They don't vote on that, but the people who are people who believe in quote gun rights or anti-choice, they do vote on that. And one of my questions is, what could change that? And the other thing, what role do you think abortion will have in the 2022 elections? And will that flip? Was that finally an issue that's people are going to vote on that on the other side?
Well, if Roe is overturned or almost totally overturned, first of all, let's acknowledge it would have catastrophic consequences for women, especially poor women and women of color. And it's a price that no one should have to pay. It may actually redound not to the benefit of Republicans in that they will incite active political activism on the part of women of every age in this country, the likes of which they haven't seen before, I believe. And to take someone's right away that's been enshrined in the Constitution for 50 years is something we haven't seen. And I think there would be a huge response to that. And so this anti-abortion politics has been a great politics for the right wing in galvanizing their base to get out to vote. If the Wisconsin Supreme Court destroys Roe, that base doesn't have to get out because they've accomplished what they wanted. And for women all across the country who believe in having a choice, and for the men who respect them for that, I think that's going to be a big issue.
Okay. Any questions? Anybody here in the audience have any additional questions? Do you have anything else you'd like to add to what you said?
No, I just think, I don't want to say this is the worst time ever for the United States. I mean, it is a kind of a narcissistic conceit to think that we're worried, we're living in just the worst time ever. I mean, there have been hard times in this country before for people who believe in democracy. Actually, slavery, number one, bad U.S. Supreme Court decisions on slavery, the repression of the women's rights movement, the repression of the labor movement, the repression of the civil rights movement, the Red Scare, McCarthyism. I mean, there have been a lot of bad times in our history, and we were able to get through those. I think if we all work hard to save our democracy, we'll get through this one.
Thank you, Matt. Wonderful.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.
Who was the name?
Before we leave, I just want to thank Stephanie and Stephen for making it possible for us to have the presentation both in Temple and on Zoom. So thank you both very much
Thank
for
you.
your hard work in making this happen very smoothly. So thanks, everyone. We will have this posted on the Temple website in the coming days, and you'll be able to access it there. So
Thank
have
you.
a good rest of your Sunday.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.